That morning, something was breathing in the swamp, but it shouldn't have been breathing. Henry turned his head and listened again. At first, he thought it was a wave. But this was deeper. More instinctive. It was as if the earth was vomiting the awakening of something very old. The air was thick and strange, as if it were filled with memories rather than oxygen. Ignoring the mud that slowed his steps, he kept walking. The mist by the lake's edge was moving. But there was no wind. He held his breath, and then, he saw it, something was stirring in the swamp. Large. Its bright eyes slowly opened from within the mud. In that moment, fear gripped him, because he realized, this creature was watching him. It wasn't just seeking rescue, it was assessing him. The gaze was so savage that it made him forget he was human. Henry took a step back but couldn't tear his eyes away. Because there, lying in the mud, though it looked like an animal, it carried a loneliness that humans couldn't comprehend. And then something happened. The creature's head turned toward him. Their eyes met. It wasn't just a paw emerging from the mud. A thought echoed in Henry's mind, I didn't go to rescue it. It called me. Henry couldn't tear his eyes away from the creature stuck in the mud. It was something everyone would run from, but he took another step closer. Because this wasn't a rescue, it was a call. Around the claws slowly emerging from the mud were rotting algae and broken reeds. Nature seemed to have abandoned this place. The silence was both scratching and suffocating. And Henry, acting on instinct, untied the rope from his back and leaned forward. Defying his own mind, he began to pull the creature out. The swamp didn't give up easily. The mud, as if alive, wanted it back with every pull. Every inch of progress was like a battle. But Henry didn't give up. Because that creature had made it clear that it was now a lion. But it wasn't a normal lion, neither its behavior nor its appearance was typical. There were strange, symmetrical marks among its fur. Its body was wounded, yes, but these wounds weren't claw marks. They had been burned, intentionally. The golden reflection in its eyes seemed to want to say something. The lion wasn't speaking to him, but its gaze, he could swear it carried a word, you're late. Suddenly, there was a movement at the other end of the swamp. But it wasn't the movement of an animal. It was so quiet, so determined. Henry froze. A slender, tall silhouette was moving through the reeds. Its back was straight. It had a hood over its head. Henry sank deeper into the mud, but he didn't take his eyes off the figure. Then the figure stopped, and without speaking, simply gestured. To the lion. Henry's heart raced. Why do you want this creature? He called out. But there was no answer. The man neither walked nor retreated. He just stood there. Then he took another step. The mud beneath his feet made no sound. It was as if nature was silently pulling him away from every place he stepped. Even nature was avoiding contact with him. Henry knelt beside the lion. Its breathing was still weak. He wrapped the rope around its back and began pulling with all his strength. He muttered to himself, no. It won't go with you. This story isn't that easy. But at that moment, a sound rose from the depths of the swamp. It was neither wind nor water. It was a vibration. A rumbling from beneath the earth. Like a pulse. No, it was more like a memory. As if a trauma that the earth had forgotten was reawakening. Henry's legs began to tremble. The lion suddenly opened his eyes. Not out of fear. Out of recognition. He knew that sound. The lion stirred. His muscles were weak, but he was ready. It was as if he had not returned from death, but rather had an unfinished task from the past. When Henry touched his shoulder, the lion turned his head only once. Then the mist rising from the swamp began to take on a different shape. It was as if the figure was not alone. As if the shadow was multiplying. Suddenly, 3 more figures appeared. All of them were hooded, all of them were silent. None of their faces were visible. But their movements were synchronized. They were human-like, but too perfect. As if someone were pulling the strings from above. They turned at the same time, stopped at the same time. One of them had a long object in their hand. A cane. No. A leash. One thought came to Henry's mind, this isn't an animal. This is a prisoner. And they want to take him back with that leash. But why now? Why after all these years? And why so mysteriously? The lion tried to get up slowly. His body trembled. He couldn't do it. But he showed his intention. He didn't want to fight, he didn't want to run away. He was just waiting for something to be completed. Henry felt this truth. Deep down, this creature's fate had intersected with his own, and then, one of the figures spoke. In a slow, cold, ancient voice, he is no longer yours. He never was. Henry did not respond. He stepped in front of the lion. He gripped the rope tightly. And in that moment, he understood, this swamp was not just a part of nature. It was a forgotten memory. And some memories remain alive, even beneath the mud. Henry did not retreat. His steps sank into the mud, but he did not stop. Standing before the lion, facing the shadows, with only a rope in his hand and only an intuition in his heart, it seemed as though time had stopped. Even the swamp seemed to hold its breath. The birds were silent, the wind had died down. Only that vibration coming from beneath the earth, that ancient rumble, continued like a heartbeat. The hooded figure raised the leash in his hand. The symbols on it were ancient. An unfamiliar language, perhaps a script born before humanity. And then, the symbols began to glow. A dim, unsettling light. The lion tried to rise again. Once more. He was weak. But there was something burning in his eyes now, resistance. This was not the gaze of a submissive creature. This was the silent cry of a being who had chosen to remember, and then the lion made a sound. It was neither a roar nor a whimper. It was a warning. A deep, ancient echo. The swamp trembled. The shadows did not retreat, but they paused. They seemed to understand the meaning of that sound. And Henry, following his instinct, took another step. He didn't think about his own life. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about writing the final line of a forgotten story. Step back, he said. His voice trembled but was resolute. This animal is no longer yours. Perhaps it never was. At that moment, one of the figures stepped forward silently. Slowly, they dropped the leash to the ground. They said nothing. But as the leash touched the ground, the mist began to dissipate. Slowly. Gradually. As if a door had closed, but not forever. Just for a while. And they, just as they had come, disappeared silently. Along with the mist. Without leaving a single footprint. Only the swamp remained. And within it, two beings, one human, the other, no longer just a lion. Henry knelt down. His hand was still on the end of the rope, but he was no longer pulling. The lion slowly bowed his head. There were no words between them, but there was a bond. It was respect. A silent thank you. Then the lion raised his head. With difficulty, he stood up. And he began to walk. Toward the edge of the swamp. With each step, he became straighter, stronger. As if the mud he left behind was not just a physical swamp, but the burden of the past. Henry did not follow him. He closed his eyes. And took a deep breath. There was a heaviness inside him. Not fear. Not anxiety. A kind of peace. Because sometimes a person's duty is not to take ownership of a creature, but simply to open the path for it to escape. The lion walked away. The mist returned, but this time it was not a threat. It was protective. As if it were wrapping around him and carrying him away. And in one last moment, the animal turned its head. Its golden eyes shone. A glance. Just a second. But that glance sealed a story forever. That morning, Henry did not save an animal that he witnessed a secret, and sometimes, the deepest secrets, don't come from the mud, but from the heart.